My name is Juliana Nykolaiszyn with the Oklahoma State University Library. Today is Monday, April 21st, 2008, and I am in Stillwater, Oklahoma, interviewing Ada Whitley. This interview is being conducted as part of O State Stories, an oral history project of the OSU Library. Thank you for joining us today. Let's begin by learning a little bit more about you. Could you tell us where you grew up and give us a little background on your early life?
Well, I grew up in Oklahoma, and I went to public schools at a small town in Muskogee County called Oklahoma. I went all 12 years, and I played sports. We didn't have a lot to do other than that. And then I graduated in 1947. That kind of tells my age. And I went to Connors Junior College for 1 year. And then I went to Northeastern State University, was at Tahlequah. And I got my bachelor's there. And I majored in physical education and business. I played on sports teams there. They were short seasons, intramural type. And we also did sports days, so we did compete against other colleges. But that is the way I began. And then I came to OSU in 1961, and I stayed until I retired in 1988.
Now, what brought you to OSU?
Well, number one, I was going to do my master's in basically health and physical education. It was a good school. I always liked Oklahoma State. I came from a county that had a lot of people that went to OU, but I preferred Oklahoma State.
Now, when you were growing up, what were some of your favorite sports? You played a lot, but what were some of your favorites?
Well, my favorites would have to be mainly basketball. And, when I was young, I played basketball and softball. We played full schedule basketball in high school. And in fact, they started back in the elementary grades and junior high, so it was a big deal at small schools in the state. Now, at that time, there were no large schools that played girls basketball. It was just the boys basketball for many years. I don't know exactly when they started, but we started competing like when we were in 5th grade.
Wow. Now, after you received your master's from OSU, what did you end up doing?
Well, actually, my main movement was between my bachelor's and my master's. After I finished my master's here, I started teaching. I was hired as an instructor in the fall after I graduated in the summer. I taught activity classes. I was in charge of the women's intramural program, which Oklahoma State has had a good intramural program probably from the beginning. And I coached, some of the it's like club sports, but I guess we'll get into that a little bit later.
Mm-hmm. Now, what sports were offered as part of women's intramurals back then?
Well, the team sports were basketball, softball, volleyball, field hockey, Were those all of the team sports? All the team sports. And you want to know about the individual sports?
You betcha.
We had, I may not can list them all, but we had tennis, badminton, fencing, table tennis, bowling, golf, and can you think of any other individual? We did all of them.
Okay.
And we competed in divisions. We had a sorority division, residence hall division, and an independent. So it was pretty big business. Oh, we also in team sports we played flag football. And in the 70s, we would have probably between 45 and 50 flag football teams for women. So there was a lot of activity.
Were there a lot of women who were interested in participating in the sport programs?
Yes.
And tell me about some of the facilities where y'all played.
Okay. For as intramurals, we were in Gallagher Hall. That's where our offices were, and there was a small classroom there. But activity classes, we had what they call the old gym, and it's the architecture building. And that was, there was a gymnasium in there, there was a swimming pool, there was a running track up above, and we had classes there. And actually, it was either the old gym or Gardner Hall. Of course, some of the classes, went outside, but they had a meeting room in Gardner Hall.
And then for fencing or basketball or flag football, where would you play?
Well, now when we were doing the flag football, we had moved to the Colvin Center.
Okay.
And this was, early when we, like probably 61 to 63 or so, we used those other facilities I mentioned. But of course there were fields around the Colvin Center for the outdoor sports. And then there were plenty of courts inside. And golf there was a classroom plus out on the North Campus. There were what we called intramural fields at one time, and there was a place for golf and that type of thing.
And bowling?
Yeah, we used the bowling alley at the Student Union.
And where was that located?
Down in the basement. It's long gone now, I believe.
How many lanes do you remember?
I think there were 8 lanes down there because we also taught bowling classes, and that's where they were taught.
Now, you played a big role in basketball here as a club sport. Tell me about how you got involved in coaching women's basketball.
Well, I had coached, but I want to back up a little bit. And what I did actually between my bachelor's and my master's, I taught 10 years. I taught in Oklahoma and Kansas. And my first teaching job included, I was actually hired as a basketball coach. And that was in Barnesdall, Oklahoma. And you can imagine how much I knew about coaching right out of college. I did play college basketball at Northeastern, but it was very few games. And I'll get into the sports days and things like that a little later, but that was actually my experience. I'd played as a youth, I played intramurals in college, and I was actually, of course, at Barnesdall, I coached basketball, plus I taught some business classes. I had a business major. But I didn't know a whole lot about it, we'll put it that way.
Now, was that high school?
That was high school.
Okay. And when they hired you to coach, did you think, oh no, or were you? What did you do to prepare yourself?
I wanted to do it, and I knew when I went that was one of my main jobs. The only big problem was the coach before was my boss, the superintendent, and keeping him from trying to tell me how to run it. That was a little bit tricky. In fact, one time he came in and he watched a little while and he had a suggestion doing something. And I didn't say anything, I just went ahead and did, what I wanted to. But then after that session was over, I did go to the office and I said, okay, either you're going to coach this or I'm going to coach it. And I guess that was one of my first encounters. He did leave me alone after that, but he probably thought, and he was probably right, that I didn't know what I was doing.
Did you have a mentor to guide you through those early years?
Not really. I had teachers and coaches that, I liked when I was like playing in high school type thing. But I didn't really have anyone I would consider a mentor. Who
were some of those coaches that you looked up to in the high school ranks?
Well, there was a man by the name that his name was Elon Rainwater that was in at the same school where I said I went for 12 years. He wasn't there the whole length of time, but he was a good coach and a good motivator, and we liked to win, but we played a lot for fun. Some of the people that got to play, wouldn't be playing today because of skills,
And did you ever play against Bertha Teague?
No, but of course we all knew Bertha Teague. There was a lot of history there, and we've known about Bertha Teague. They had what they called Bertha Teague Classic for a while, and the state schools, played that. That was I don't remember exactly. I know Oklahoma always played in that, and so did OSU. Incidentally, back in the early days, OSU fans will be glad to know I don't think we ever were defeated during the early years by OU.
That's good to know. Now, in your 10 years coaching, between your bachelor's and your master's?
No, I only coached between my bachelor's and my master's, just the 2 years at Barnsdall.
Do you remember your record?
No, I don't. I've been asked that before, and everybody now keep all the records of everything, and we played. We had I remember certain games and things, and we had a good team, but we didn't have a championship team. But when we left, when we moved, back then it wasn't too important, and you just tossed your scorebooks along with the other junk when you moved on to a different place.
What motivated you to go on and get a master's degree?
Well, I had an older sister that actually did that, and I guess my thought was probably to go ahead and do it anyway, because I just believed in education. I enjoyed school. I had a good time. I think college years are probably your best years. But my sister had her doctorate, and my dad saw her go through that, and he said, "Oh, you don't need one." so I wasn't inspired to go any farther than that.
Now, tell me about how you got involved coaching the club team at OSU.
Okay. We had an organization in all the colleges, I think in the state and all around the country, had what they called Women's Recreation Association, and it was WRA. And it was actually student run, and they had the officers, and their main responsibility was to work with all the intramural sports and oversee those. And they also, we had state sports days, and they were in charge of, organization on that part. But there were teams. We had a basketball sports day, we had volleyball, and all of those, and then we had individual sports. And that's where all the colleges in the state would meet at a certain school, and they played games, and they would have shortened games because they would play, let's take basketball for instance, they would play 2 or 3 games in one day. So actually, when we started, that was the main way that we got with other schools. And it would kind of be a long day, but it was a fun day. And the way we got our teams, you just put the notice in the old collie, and we had intramurals. We'll talk about basketball. We had intramurals during that time, and we'd put notices up, and the people that were interested in trying out for the team would come out. And you could, if you were a good athlete and wanted to participate in more than one thing, these sports days were seasonal. Our season was short. And like at the beginning of the school year, there'd be field hockey. And then like midterm, they would put the announcement out for volleyball. After Christmas, we started basketball. So there was no long term. And the students that we got that tried out, they all came from little schools. And they had a lot of talent, their fundamentals were good, but they just wanted to play longer. So we would practice about, I'd say, 2 weeks before we started playing anything. And so we didn't have a lot of time to work up a whole lot of plays and things. We just used good fundamentals and did the short-term thing. In other words, they could handle the ball and they could hit the goal, and that's the 2 main things. But we would go to the sports day and play those, say, 2 or 3 games. And then we would have several games, just that it might be home and away, or we might have a school that would come to, OSU and play. But actually our whole season during any of those sports would be, the most would probably be 12 games. So it was get in there and do that, have fun, win what you can win. And then when the season was over, if you wanted to go out for the next one, which would be softball, or it might be track and field. But that's the way it actually started.
And how did they decide which schools would host sport days?
Yeah, I'll get into that. What they did, they had like a business meeting once a year where all of the faculty or the whoever's sponsoring the Women's Recreation Association, they would get together and set up schedules. Schools would say, like Oklahoma State might say, we'd like to do the volleyball this year. And if another school wanted to do it, they'd go ahead and, take a vote and see who got to do this. But they passed these around. And something else on that order, we always had teams. Every school fielded teams because that was really the only special opportunity that women got to participate in the sports other than the intramural program. And these teams were coached by the women's physical education teachers. And guess how much they were paid?
Tell me about that.
Zero. It was part of their assignment. And it was coaches that, were interested in that sport. And they were particularly wanting to, they had quite a few physical education majors. So they wanted them to have the opportunity, to play on teams, if they were good enough to make it. But most of the players came from the small schools. They were as good as they could be. And once again, don't ask our record, but we won most of our games. In other words, we had enough talent, but we had, like all staters that might be playing, and we'd spot people in intramurals and would ask, would you like to come out and play for the varsity team? Sometimes they'd say yes, and sometimes they'd say, I'm burned out. They'd played too much in high school. But that's actually the way this ran. And transportation, we used school vehicles. When we first started, like in 1961, a lot of people think that's when basketball here started, basketball teams. That's not true. Women's basketball goes back. I've seen pictures where they wore the bloomers. Mm-hmm. And I had heard, I don't know whether it's factual or not, but there was a women's basketball team on the OSU, which was OAMC campus before the men's.
That is true.
And I had heard that. I tell you, we had a real strong physical education department. And we had a strong leader in the state, Valerie Colvin, that the Colvin Center is named after. And Central State also had a outstanding lady that was in charge of their department. Her name was Emma Plunkett. And then OU had Maureen Bowling. And they were really leaders in the state, and they wanted to make sure that they had good physical education programs. And also activity for the girls. See, back when I came, physical education was required. Everybody that was enrolled, all females, had to have 4 hours of physical education. And the last group to drop that rule was home ec department. So let's see. We also, during those early games, we had to furnish referees. In other words, the referees that we took, would not officiate our games, but they were trained, they were students or faculty. And I don't believe that there was any compensation for that. It was just a learning experience.
What about uniforms?
Oh, no, yeah, that's good too. We had uniforms for the physical education classes, and it was black shorts and white shirts, just cotton shirts. And that was used for, quite a few years in the 60s. And they didn't have numbers or anything. What they had, have you ever heard of pennies?
No.
Pinnies. Well, what they are, they're like a bib that has a number on the front and a number on the back, and they snap. And anyway, that's what we were wearing. And then finally, I talked with one of my former players, and I said, "What do you remember about the basketball?" And she said, "I remember those old. We had some warm-ups, a little later on, I'd say in the late 60s, but each team, they had to be passed around, When they got through one season, they'd be washed or cleaned or whatever, and then go to the next team." She said, I remember those old baggy warm-ups, and, they were black and with, of course, the orange trim. And she said, "I also remember having to share a volleyball top with another person. We didn't have enough. In other words, volleyball would be playing. They would get the uniforms when we finally got the uniforms, and then but they had to be through with them, by when basketball started, or they would schedule different days. So they'd have to wash those in between. So that was the uniform, the way they actually started. Just really, they were uniforms, but they weren't what we think of today.
Now, going back to sport days, who were all the Oklahoma schools that were involved?
I would say most of the schools.
Okay.
Now, we had the state schools were the main ones. Now, TU would participate some, but it was basically, the OU, OSU, and then all of the Northeastern, Northwestern, Central State, all of those, and they all participated. Now, our biggest problem when we did play some, and, we'd think, well, let's go play a junior college. They were playing full schedules. And that's when we had trouble, because they'd been practicing. They practiced the whole year, and they played just regular schedule like they play today. But that was back in the 60s. But, we didn't compete, the larger schools and the smaller schools. They were just all, in the same pool. And the larger schools didn't necessarily, win the thing. They usually came out with, even though we played lesser games and shorter halves, lost my train of thought. Do you ever do that?
All the time.
Well, it'll come to me later. One thing I wanted to say on the referees, and I will talk about the organizations, how they graduated down. We did have national referees that during this time, they could, anybody that wanted to be a national referee, they had a book, they could study for an exam, and they had examiners, state examiners, and they were made up of faculty members that had gone through all this, and they could get a national, you may have heard of DGWS, Division of Girls and Women's Sports. It was one of the organizations. They could get a national official's license. And, you, instead of just wearing the striped shirt, you had that national emblem on. So, they worked on all of the phases, but everything was short term. I want to say something else about where did we play. The first year, the first few years, probably 3 or so, we played in the old gym. And one of the basketball players used to come over and watch the girls when they weren't practicing. And he worked with the post players. He asked me one day, said, "Can I work with your post players?" He was a post player. His name was James King. And anyway, of course, I appreciated it because I wasn't an expert at post players. And of course, the girls really enjoyed having somebody on the men's team that took an interest in them.
Did a lot of people show up for the games, or was it just
small?
Mm-hmm.
Just small. Back for us, the rules. When I first came here in 1961, we played just like the regular high school rules. It's 6-on-6, and they didn't cross the half line. And the high schools played that for many, many years. And then we went to, in 1965, we went to what's called the Rover. And it was 6 players on the team, but 4 could be across the line. Like in high school, you were across the line, the other team got it out. And you didn't have to say, okay, I'm going to be a rover. But anytime the ball went down to your goal, 4 players would cross over. So that left, that there would be, 4 left.
Mm-hmm.
And, 2 of each team. But it was called the roving player, and it was really a good game. And they played that until about 1968, I think, is when the college started playing the 5-on-5 like they play today. But it started out Women's Recreation Association. And then we had what was called Oklahoma Athletic and Recreation Federation for College Women, OARFCW. And that had a national organization that was called just the Athletic Recreation Federation for College Women. And they had national conferences. And this was a leadership type thing. And this is where the state organized what they were going to play and when they would get together for the state meetings. But, I took students to North Carolina that were officers in WRA, and that was really a good group. And then after that was DGWS, that's the Division of Girls and Women's Sports. And then it's AIAW, and that's Association of Intercollegiate Athletics for Women, and that was the one that preceded NCAA.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of the way that it evolved.
Lots of changes in the
A lot of
governing
changes.
bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell me about how I'm gonna assume sports days did not last.
No, they were played many, many years, but when they started playing, competition where they had full schedules,
Mm-hmm.
those went out.
And about what year?
Well, I would say, it would be in the 60s. Probably close to 1970, I would say.
And so how did you handle scheduling at that point? Because now you're on full schedules.
Right. Actually, they just, set them up, of course, who they wanted to play. And, of course, now with the conference, the Big 12 sets up that, and then the athletic department sets up, the other games that are played. It's basically, the coaches decide who they want to play and if they can play them.
Now, during your tenure as coach, did you ever have trouble finding players?
Not really. some, one told me one day, said, I did come out one year, but you were a little short, and she said, I didn't get to play much. And that's probably the only reason I made the team, but usually, we had plenty, because that's, sports is one thing people like to continue if they can, and they don't like to have to stop just because they go to school or go to work or something.
Was it tough finding time for practices while juggling your teaching load?
Mm-hmm. I tell you what, it didn't matter. We taught a full load of our whatever we were teaching, and this was just on the side. Yes, you were very, very busy. They didn't. They were these two ladies that I mentioned, at Miss Colvin, and the one from Central. They didn't think that you should have, any extra time. That was just, part of the job. And when you'd say, I'm teaching, too many classes, I can't do all this, they didn't much agree with you. They just left you. And it would be interesting. I might teach maybe 7 classes, and they'd be Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, or Tuesday and Thursday. And I know there's a big change in the number of classes that they, teach today. If they teach, 3, they think that's more than enough. Mm-hmm. But, they grew up that way, building a program, and they only had so many people to do it. And they just thought, it wouldn't hurt. It's what you should do.
Now, did Valerie Colvin hire you out of your master's program?
Yes. Actually, she was on the committee. I never had her in a class. But the ones that I had with my graduate work, I guess they thought I could do this, and I didn't know the difference. I did come to OSU. I was teaching in Muskogee Alice Robertson Junior High, and I actually came for a cut to come to OSU. My thought was, I'll get in and I'll go up. It's easier to get it before you get in.
Mm-hmm. And what do you remember most about Miss Colvin?
Well, she was quite a go-getter. She was a ruler, we'll put it that way. She worked hard. She did a good job, and I remember telling her one time, she said, well, we've always done this. And I remember telling her, well, just because you've always done it, we don't have to continue it. But, I was trying to get out of something, an extra class or something. But she was one of the starters of all the physical education in the area.
Do you remember the first game you ever coached here at OSU?
No, I don't. It was, so near like what I was doing, working with intramurals and all this and that. There was a lot of camaraderie between the college instructors in the state. In fact, for many, many years, we got together once a year at a camp down on like Lake Murray or somewhere like that for many years just for fun. So, we were close and, still see each other and do some things, but it was really a good relationship among all of there wasn't rivalry until you stepped out on the court, and then of course everybody liked to win.
So just so we have it on record, what years did you serve as coach of the women's team?
Okay, 1961 is when I came and started, and 72 was actually when 1972 I think was the last year that I coached. J.C. Showers came after me.
So you've had the opportunity to interact with lots of players during your time. Any stand out from those early years? Well,
I tell you what, one of the biggest thrills for me was when we played OU this year in basketball and Phil Gallagher, Iowa. I don't know whether you were there or not, but that was amazing. And, that's something that I didn't know whether we would ever see. I thought it was about time, but several of the players that played back during that time were there to see that. And, they were just thrilled at how far they've come from, their uniforms, what we used to wear as the pennies and this and that, to up to where they are today.
I mean, what a great atmosphere that was.
Oh, that was wonderful. And in fact, I talked with a couple of friends that have recently retired from USO, Central State, to me, and they were there. And I think both of them got their doctorates here. They did graduate work here. And they just thought that was just the most fun they'd ever seen. And it was really, because the ones that had played basketball, these two had not played, but this one girl, I think she probably played like in around 1974 or 5, somewhere in there. But, she said that was just amazing. And there were, quite a few of the old timers that came back and saw that. But who would have thought, that was exciting.
Now, do you still hear from some of your former players?
Yes, I do some. There are very few that come back. The Cowgirls have a Cowgirl reunion, and but there will be, one or two that will come back every now and then. Most of them are teaching, or by now they could be retired.
Were you ever able to play or practice in Gallagher?
No. I don't think they started in Gallagher until maybe Judy Boofer came. And but we played our games over in the Colvin Center, what they call the double gym. And before that, we played our games in the old gym. Just a little sideline that has nothing to do with basketball, but talking about intramurals earlier, we had tennis courts volleyball courts on the tennis courts. We used to have 8 tennis courts over there by the architecture building, the old gym. And they played on both sides of the building. They had every day at a certain time during volleyball season, they'd put up a volleyball net, and there'd maybe be 8 games going at once, but they played outside. And that was, there'd be 60, maybe 60 teams that were playing, but they were played outside on the tennis courts, the volleyball. But our facilities are a lot better now, so
Was the campus very supportive during your 11 years? Was there a lot of support outside of health and physical education?
Oh, most of it was, went toward the men's basketball program. And I don't think they, really cared too much, They, I'm sure they wouldn't wanted to let them over to Gallagher too much earlier than what they got over there. So, I mean, there wasn't. I'm not sure that the forerunners, like Miss Colvin's group, really thought it was necessary. They probably thought the sports days and, intramurals and that type of thing were, good enough that they would gain just as much as if they definitely would want them to miss a lot of class and, to go to the games and play like competition is today.
Did you think it was, at an acceptable level?
Oh, well, I guess I did at the time because, it was basically recreation. And there were no other big schools or even four-year schools in the state that were, playing competitively. So, I didn't give it a whole lot of thought. But, I was glad when they did have teams, but I wasn't in the picket line or anything.
Now, during your 11 years, are there any key moments that just stand out for you that you just think, wow, it's really great to be a coach?
I think a coach is a teacher. I think it's great to be a teacher. And I think they learn a lot, if they do play in a sport. I think it gets people's interest that maybe wouldn't be interested in going to school at all. But, no, a lot of good things have happened, but I can't just specifically say. But I enjoyed what I did. And I'm a firm believer if you're not happy at work, you need to change jobs. I can't think of anything worse than having to go to work every day just to get that paycheck. And, I've enjoyed all my jobs. I've enjoyed OSU. I mean, I enjoy retirement. And I really wouldn't do it any other way.
Now, in 1971, you were kind of at a crossroads with the basketball program. Tell me about that.
Well, they were beginning to get, I guess the smaller schools were beginning to play more probably than the larger schools as far as women's basketball. But there came to a time that Title IX was one of the main things. They had an opportunity to get money to participate, and there's always people that would like to. And what's fair for one, is only fair for the other. But I just thought, I've coached in high school, and I coached, not long seasons, but I coached. And as I said, coaching, I think, is teaching. And I thought, well, I don't know that I want to, I had to do one or the other. And I had been in the field long enough that I was ready to slow down a little bit instead of, just getting out and having to recruit and raise money and that kind of thing. So that's really, and in fact, J.C. Showers came up to me I guess probably about the last year. And she said, hey, if you're tired of the basketball, I would take it. So, she kind of asked for it. And I couldn't do both because it was a full-time job. And then, of course, basketball now, is a full-time job. So it didn't take me long to decide that, I'd been there and done that. And I just didn't want to do more. I couldn't do both.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad that it went the way that I did.
Mm-hmm.
Because I wouldn't have had time to come over here today if I were coaching. But I really believe in women's sports. I really like it. And I want to see it played right. I enjoy it. But I know enough about the game to know, when they have, when the referees miss something. But, or the action of the coach or the players. But, I'm glad they have the opportunity, and there's some amazing athletes out there. And some are going to college because of it, probably could never have gone.
Now, was Coach Showers on the faculty of health and physical education?
Yes. She hadn't been there, but, probably maybe a year. And when she told me, that she would like to have the team. And as I said, actually the intramurals and recreation area, and what I did, I also worked with non-credit before I retired, non-credit classes at the Colvin Center. And they were actually under student services, at that time. So they were making a change. It used to all be under, in the academic area. And then after they got the building and so forth over there, they went into a recreation area. And they were in other words, I would have had different bosses for according to what I was doing.
And were you involved with the basketball program after you
retired?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I went to a lot of the games when Judy Buford came. I took trips with them, and some, when they traveled. And it was just starting. They needed, all the help they could get, but I did travel with them some then, just the fact that I wasn't helping much, but we did happen to, become friends, and there was a spare, seat, on the bus.
Well, in our next interview coming up, I'd like to discuss your time on the road during that period, and also cowgirl football, cowgirl basketball. Football crazy, cowgirl basketball through the years, because you're still a pretty big fan. You've seen a lot of changes.
Yes.
So I think that'll be the next direction we take. But I do appreciate your time today, and if there's anything else you'd like to say, any final comments?
No, I think that that's about it.
All right. Well, thank you very much.